Hello, welcome everyone to this next session where we will be taking a look at or diving a little bit further into some of the AI conversations we've had earlier today. And we're going to zoom out a little bit first as we start and take a look at the very important topic of AI ethics and governance and financial supervision, where if done well, of course, we are supporting building trust and accountability. So we have a good diverse panel for you today, which will take us through various approaches and perspectives. And we have a fantastic moderator who will be leading the conversation. So I'll happily hand over to our moderator, who is Calliope Letsu, who is a researcher at Cambridge Septech Lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this exciting session on AI ethics and governance in financial supervision. I'm very happy to have here today all of these panelists as we'll discuss one of the most critical topics in financial oversight. So hearing also the previous discussions today and the keynotes, there is a clear message on the need for AI governance and ethics in the use of AI in financial supervision. So in this section, we will explore the cutting-edge innovations shaping supervisory practices worldwide, but from an ethics and governance angle. So we will discuss ethical frameworks, how the ethical frameworks, transparency, explainability, other elements of AI governance can ensure the responsible use of AI in financial supervision. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that there is a Q&A section where you can post your questions. We will discuss them toward the end. And there is also a poll running alongside this session. You might see it already. Yep, it's there on our screens. Please take a moment, share your thoughts on the greatest challenge in relation to AI governance and ethics in financial supervision. We will revisit the results towards the end of the discussion. Just to provide some context of our discussion before moving on to our great panel today. So we have already seen in previous panels earlier, AI is transforming the way financial supervisors operate, enabling data-driven decisions, improving risk detection, greater efficiency. However, the transformation also presents challenges that must be addressed to ensure AI systems are ethical, transparent, and explainable. Without robust ethical frameworks and AI governance strategies, agencies risk deploying AI systems that may be opaque, biased, or unaccountable, potentially undermining public trust and supervisory effectiveness. Challenges like poor data quality, integration issues can hamper the performance and reliability of AI systems. So there is a need for strong AI, but also data governance practices and collaborative efforts to improve data standards and interoperability. We've seen from the beginning of the day some insights from the State of SupTech this year's report that highlight also the urgency of this discussion. Not all agencies have, for example, governance frameworks or strategies for governance. Over 2/3 of the agencies face significant challenges with data quality, system integration, and governance. But on the other hand, we see also the maturity level of AI implementation across agencies steadily increasing. We have more than 1/3 of agencies actively exploring AI, 26%, as we've seen earlier, already piloting projects, experimenting with early stage implementation. But of course, the widespread adoption at institutional level is still low. So we have these insights that show also the need for clear AI governance and ethical frameworks. Practical strategies are also going to be discussed today to address challenges related to transparency or explainability. And at the same time, global regulatory efforts like the EU AI Act are paving the way for structured approaches to address risks related to governance. However, implementation across jurisdictions is uneven, and this complicates also the alignment and the collaboration. So with this context, let's see our panel. I'm very honored to introduce our panelists today. each one of whom brings a wealth of experience and insight into AI ethics and governance, starting with Ayota Nasr, economist at the OECD. Ayota has deep expertise in global regulatory frameworks and policy development. Pertu Korhonen, Director of Financial Analysis and Innovation at the Qatar Financial Center Regulatory Authority, who also brings the practical perspective from a supervisory angle. And last but not least, Dr. Till Klein, Head of Trustworthy AI, the Applied AI Institute. He leads their efforts on creating ethical and reliable AI systems. So let's get started and welcome everyone in our panel. So to kick off, let's talk first about transparency and explainability as these elements of AI governance. Ayota, at an organizational level, what is the importance of transparency and explainability for financial supervisors? Why are these key elements of AI governance?
Sure. Thank you, Calliope, and thanks for allowing me to be part of this very exciting SupTech Week. And also congratulations on the launch of your report, very insightful, and I'm sure it will be a useful tool for supervisors around the globe. So on your question around the explainability, so the lack of explainability is one of the main difficulties that regulators and supervisors have encountered when it comes to AI in finance in particular. And it was already a prominent issue when it comes to narrow AI and machine learning models, where, of course, progress has been made at the scientific level. It has been massively accentuated as a challenge when it comes to generative AI models and more advanced kind of AI systems. Now, why is it important? It's because the difficulty in explaining and in reproducing this kind of decision mechanism of AI models makes it very challenging to mitigate any of the risks stemming from the use of this kind of models. And what do I mean by that? For example, how can we adjust, say, a trading strategy if we're using an AI model, if we cannot trace the linear relationship between the inputs, the parameters, and the outputs, the decisions, the prediction, or any kind of decisions that the model is giving us as output. And even more so, it makes it hard to detect any kind of inappropriate activity. For example, inappropriate use of data, use of unsuitable data, if we don't have the transparency of what kind of data are being used. And this in turn increases the risk of biased results, of discriminatory outputs of the model, and can result in low levels of trust. This can even be in conflict with the compliance obligation when it comes to supervised entities in the financial sector. It can be in conflict with the fiduciary duty that financial market participants have. And this is actually explaining in part why we see a slow-paced deployment of the more advanced LLMs by the financial sector participants currently in many jurisdictions. Now, the question that comes out of all this is, of course, how we address it. And this is where it becomes increasingly important for the supervisors in particular. There are different levels that we can discuss, and I'm sure the fellow panelists will have also other parts of the toolkit. In some sense, this kind of black box question is something that is increasingly unavoidable. So we may need to focus more on limiting what the model is actually being used for. But the most important part goes back to what you mentioned, Calliope, at your initial intervention around accountability and governance. And so whether it is data governance and data management, whether it is disclosure and increased transparency, whether it's actually governance in terms of assigning accountability to the human in the loop, these will be the most important ways of trying to mitigate the risks that come from the lack of explainability. And just one thing to close that is particularly important, linking to the topic of this week, the supervisory focus will perhaps need to start shifting from just bringing trust through increased transparency towards using more technical ways of managing the risk, whether it is with stress testing, with adversarial model stress testing, with outcome-based metrics, or with subtech tools such as the ones that you are presenting and discussing this week. We will increasingly need more of a shift of the supervisory focus to a technical way of managing this kind of conundrums.
Thank you, Ayotan. Thank you, and I fully agree with you. So, and we will have, I'm sure we will have the chance to discuss it later on today. So moving though to Pertu, to see also Pertu in your work in the authority, how can transparency, explainability, accountability be achieved in AI-driven financial supervision? Are there, for example, any specific mechanisms that the supervisors can adopt?
Thanks, Kelly. And also from my side, thanks for inviting me for this great event. We seem to be growing in size year by year, and that's great. SupTech is really becoming important part of every supervisor's toolkit. Also, the report, I've certainly not yet had the time to study it in detail, but tomorrow I will be a good amount of time on that. Maybe I'll just pick up what Iota said first. Something, because I think it was important what you said, that supervisors should be in their supervision. They should be looking into more technical ways of performing their duties. And something that was actually a year ago in this same event, I really liked the Saudi central bank's demo on a exercise or a proof of concept, where they sent the firms a set of transactions, a file of transactions for AML sort of or suspicious transaction spotting purposes, and then the firms were mandated to run the transactions against their own models, and then come back to the central bank with their findings. And I think that's a one great way of performing oversight in this new world, where you can then study the results and compare them as the regulator. But let me now then move to really to my more my bread and butter, which is SupTech, and how we, as you asked, Kelly, how can we ensure that the accountability and explainability and transparency are there? And I think we are in a quite different place from the industry, in the sense that, luckily so, that our decisions are not yet requiring reliance on algorithmic decisions without any human oversight. It's much more likely that in the industry you will have credit decisions or algorithmic trading where there's no human in the loop when the transactions are performed. But in public policy, I would also stay away from any automated decision making for quite some time. Now, of course, there's discussion, or there's the new era potentially of DAOs, and so autonomous digital organizations, and that, of course, is opening up a completely new world of challenge in terms of accountability. If supervision and regulation of such entities similarly then would need to be, of course, completely automated. But I think in my mind, I don't dare to think of that world just yet. I think it feels quite risky, and I don't have solutions how to manage that risk just yet. And therefore, I'm quite happy that we are still in a place where the important decision at the end of the workflow will still be performed by a human being. And hence, nothing really necessarily changes that radically from the supervisory endpoint. The heads of the supervisory agencies, the supervisory teams, depending on the decision-making model, they are still fed assessment, analysis, contributions by people providing assessments to them. And there's no way now, and there's no way in the future to shy away from that accountability as the ultimate decision maker. If you don't trust the assessments coming to you, then you need to ask more questions. You need to challenge your analysts and in the future co-pilots or the analysts co-pilots to be comfortable. But accountability is not going to go away, and I think it is really, like I said, quite a lucky place we are. There was one paper I just read about performing machine learning based detection of emergency number calls, where they wanted to be able to pick up cases where the person is possibly going through a cardiac arrest at the time of the call, and that is something where it was really important to perform the decision as quickly as possible, and therefore then there will be accountability implications there. But for us, luckily, we don't need to for now. The explainability, yes, I really like the explainability or explainable AI approaches and the different models, and there's actually a growing kit of tools available, and I think IOTA was referring to this as well. So we are increasingly equipped with good quality tools that help us to make sense of the predictions by the models. But I would still then make a distinction between explainability in terms of really shedding light on the reasoning of the model. That's not usually the case. The reasoning is another level, and these explainability models are just models themselves, and they are different models. Therefore, they are more like ways of generating stories, and we are storytelling animals, right? So in this process of assessments and judgments, I think it is now, and it will always be, about finding a story you can believe in, and then selling this story to someone who you report to or your colleagues. And through this challenge mechanism, then the organization collectively finding a story they can believe in feeding into the ultimate judgment. Then what comes to the transparency of AI, I think increasingly, let's take a step back. I think many of these elements we have already, because we have, as organizations, we have published regulation, we have published our own goals and missions and visions and values. And I think these will be a really important pillars also in the new world, or in the AI augmented world, in being the benchmark against which our work will be assessed. We will need to also make statements about or produce policies and frameworks, how we are dealing with privacy of data, information security, ethical considerations to try to make our data as unbiased as possible for the assessments. But I think most of it is still the same sort of statements about what we are here for, and ensuring that everyone inside and outside of the organization understands what our role and our objectives are in the society. Then furthermore, of course, there needs to be internal audit for the data as well as the models we are using. So there needs to be either internal audit or otherwise independent audit, that which then from the technical perspective goes through the mechanisms, the models, the outputs, and again, then compares them to the goals and the objectives we have set for ourselves.
Great. Very insightful, Pertu. Very insightful, all of your points. Like the story, the story to believe in. I'll keep that. But moving on actually to Till and exploring a little bit the regulatory approaches and the role of governance frameworks. So Till, you have worked a lot on AI regulation. Does the EU AI Act establish any governance requirements as a regulation? And if yes, what are these requirements that the Act establishes?
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Calliope, and for inviting me to this panel. Really, very interesting to dive into the subtech world. Maybe for background, so I'm not too deep in the finance, but instead I'm working on the AI Act and looking at this through the lens of different sectors. So I think that's the perspective I can bring in. Now, in the theme of the panel, right? It's about ethics and governance in financial supervision. I think here it's really important pointing out that the AI Act has a very strong link to human rights. So it's a product safety regulation, and it has sort of a few main things it seeks to protect. These include health, safety, and fundamental human rights. And here I want to stress the human rights part because that's something that we don't really find in other product safety regulations as well. So here's strong emphasis on that one. And we actually do find also quite a number of principles in terms of trustworthy AI in the AI Act. So this actually preceded the negotiation of the AI Act. There was this high-level expert group, a group of esteemed experts from academia, society, and so on that worked on trustworthy AI before the AI Act started. And so their work has really set the basis for the AI Act. And we still find that through the protection of human rights, but also when it comes to the requirements for high-risk AI systems, when it comes to the list of prohibitions. So we have strong traces that the AI Act is indeed based on those human-centric principles. Now, when it comes to supervision, I think there's two main phases or streams, if you will, that are worth considering. One is the sort of the stream from the lab to the market, I should say, right? So this is all that concerns development. And here it's worth noting that the AI Act follows what they call a risk-based approach. So if you have an AI system that you want to use, be it, for instance, as a credit institution or other financial service provider, or any other AI system operator for that matter, you need to find out in which risk class is that system falling. Is it prohibited? Is it high risk, limited, or low risk? And depending on that classification, it will determine what are the requirements you need to fulfill before you can enter the market. Prohibitions, as it suggests, is not allowed, and the most debated class is the high-risk requirements, right? So they are in principle allowed, but you need to fulfill quite strict requirements or comprehensive requirements before you can access the market. And the other ones then have in the proportionality principle less requirements. So that's the one thing, right? If you're going to the market, and then in deployment, there's also a number of things when it comes to incidents, right? So for instance, the affected person, for instance, a consumer, has the right for an explanation under the AI Act. So if I'm, I don't know, go to my bank and want to apply for a loan, and then they, tell me, you can have those conditions, and I need to be informed that this was actually done through the help of an AI system, I can ask, hey, I'm feeling a bit iffy, explain me how, and then they actually have to, right? So there's some provisions along those lines. Now, what does it mean for the supervisor? So when it comes to the development and the stream to the market, the supervisor needs to oversee, for instance, if the classification was done properly. It needs to oversee if the conformity assessment, the process through which you demonstrate compliance, was done at all, if it was done correctly. Or when it comes to those prohibitions, you need to find out, is anyone still using any prohibited practices on the market after a certain timeline? So these are some, I think, really clear tasks for the supervisor, and we still have to see how to do that. And then when it comes to those incidents, for instance, if there are repeated reports about something, then there's a matter of establishing a causality between the harm that was caused to the affected person, for instance, and the model that was used, right? And there may be different actors in between, and establishing that causality, I think, is also quite a tricky task at this point. Now, wrapping up, and this is, I think, where we see things unfolding as we speak, right? We see supervisory authorities being kind of getting ready on the EU level, be it the AI office, the AI board, the EU data protection supervisor, and others, still kind of figuring out what to do in certain ways, at least. And we also see that national, like the member states, they need to establish national competent authorities, market surveillance authorities, and so on. So we still haven't seen all those decisions falling into place. But in sum, we can say the AI Act is a hard law. It is built on human rights. It protects them. There are tasks for supervisors, but since the AI Act was just issued in August this year, we still need to see how things are unfolding and how it will be enacted moving forward.
Thank you, Till. And just to build up on that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the EU AI Act, specifically for the financial supervisors, has some requirements for financial supervisors overseeing the implementation of AI in financial services. So exactly what you've mentioned are all considerations for the financial supervisors following with the regulation. Thank you so much. Iota, the EU AI Act is a model on AI regulation, but we see AI regulatory developments all over the world at the moment that will potentially impact financial supervisors. From your side, from your opinion, do you think that these AI regulations in development will radically reshape the supervision practices? Are they necessary, the AI regulations, for implementing ethical AI governance frameworks in financial supervision?
It's a very good question. It's a very diverse environment. Last month at the OECD, the Committee on Financial Markets published a report where we analyze the approaches of AI regulation in finance in 49 jurisdictions, where we have a lot of detail about the different ways that regulators in OECD member countries and non-OECD jurisdictions are approaching regulation of AI in finance in particular. I will put the link on the chat for those who are interested to deep dive, and I will just, in the interest of time, broadly give you just 2 or 3 of the main things that come out of this analysis and that relate to your question. So in the vast majority of the 49 jurisdictions that we analyzed, there is appropriate regulation in place for AI in finance. And this can include the various different ways of authorities overseeing this activity. Depending on the jurisdictions, you can have pre-existing rules, you can have newly introduced regulation that is binding, like the AI Act in the EU. You can have finance or cross-sectorial rules. You can have guidance or blueprints. You can have principles like the AI principles of the OECD and other kind of principles by standard-setting bodies. And all of them are non-mutually exclusive. And the important one that people may not be always very familiar with is that pre-existing regulation applicable to AI activity continues to apply when it comes to AI, even though in some cases AI is not explicitly referenced. And what do I mean by that? Model risk management, model governance, or operational risk frameworks. These are very well covered by existing rules in the financial sector. And given that at least OECD member countries have a technology neutral approach to financial regulation, the rules apply regardless of whether the decision came with the use of an AI mechanism or with a traditional model or just by a human. So the technological advances do not render the existing compliance requirements of supervised entities inapplicable. That said, what is very interesting to also note is that the majority of jurisdictions covered by the OECD analysis have acknowledged that there may be gaps going forward, particularly as implementation and deployment of advanced models progresses, and also implementation of new regulations such as the EU AI Act also progresses. And so there is an acknowledgement by authorities that they keep monitoring the frameworks that are in place to make sure that there are no gaps and that they remain fit for purpose. And that is a very important consideration also that we need to keep in mind. And of course, the ethics question that you bring up is something that we can, of course, discuss further if you want, but there is already a lot that is covered within the scope of overarching principles and rules, whether it can be something very general as human rights laws, anti-discrimination, or whether it's something very specific to AI, and it could even come from the industry itself in the form of code of conduct or other kind of guidance. So a lot of diversity, but the main principles coming out across the board.
Thank you, Iota. Yes, the financial services are definitely highly regulated already. So an AI regulation on top of that, another requirement, but yet definitely it should be evaluated, the impact. Now, if we look also the ethical challenges that Iota mentioned in deploying AI-based supervisory tools, Pertu, looking into the AI systems that the supervisors rely on, how can the supervisors ensure that they remain the critical decision makers, the supervisors, and avoid over-dependence on automated outputs, which is also important in AI-based SupTech?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, let me first of all to set the objective here. Again, as an innovator, I would like to be. I would like to find ways of us being able to do a lot of innovation, and then, of course, also ensuring that we have the governance right. But I think a pragmatic way of looking at the whole transformation in decision making at regulators is to start from the fact that we are far from perfect at the moment. We are human beings, and all of us come to the play with our own biases, and therefore, as I already alluded in the previous comment, it's the process within the regulatory authority where the stories are challenged by peers and other teams and superiors, and ultimately the head of organization who might be the one who puts the name under the decision. And this is a way of ensuring that we align with the values, with mission, vision, and the regulation we ourselves have put out. And we only need to be at least as good as we have been so far, and with less time spent or less resource spent. Or ideally, I would like to believe definitely that we will be able to produce better supervisory judgments with less time spent on them using AI. So in that sense, I don't think it's impossible task at all what we have in front of us. Then what comes to the ensuring that we use the tools in a safe manner, and that we don't over rely on the results. In here, we could first of all divide this, or there's different layers. So there's the individual supervisors, and then there's teams like mine who deliver SupTech tools for the use of the supervisors. And then there's the heads of or the department level and the leadership team above there. So my team, of course, has its own role in ensuring that we don't we avoid making the supervisors to go through one route and a narrowing route and maybe missing information or coming up with wrong conclusions. But if we start from the supervisors, which I think was the main point of this question, I don't think this is much different from the being analytical and being critical, a critical thinker, as what we have been so far always. But then there are, of course, new challenges and new ways people, all of us, need to be aware when we use these new tools. So I would maybe firstly divide the phase, or divide the task by the phases of a supervisory workflow or analytical workflow. So where is AI used in this process? So firstly, it's used in the information gathering and synthesis. And this is now actually very important, the synthesis part, because the LLMs are now amazingly good at integrating information across information sources, different languages, different schemas, databases. And they are amazingly powerful in that, and will be used increasingly in this process. Then the second phase is the actual analysis, or the core of the process of assessing what does this information we have gotten together now mean for the question or the supervisory objective we have at hand. And then ultimately, thirdly, the reporting, communicating the results to other stakeholders, and then ultimately the firm outside. And now, by the way, interestingly, the LLMs, the co-pilots, becoming the interface increasingly to all of the interaction we have with the machines. This is becoming like a cycle. So the information gathering and synthesis and the reporting are becoming neighbors in this process. And my advice to supervisors would be that when increasingly we will be relying on co-pilots or chat models, synthesis or integration of information available, the biggest risk there is that we have missed something. False negative is a big risk here. So maybe we have been boxed into a subset of data and we are missing something really, really important. And it's very important that we all remain skeptical then, and if possible, try different approaches, like with the case of the chat models, different prompts. We use maybe different tools, different completely different approaches to find information, Googling, or looking into the folders as in the old days, and trying to find the documents that are relevant, and then just assess that am I finding some information that looks very relevant, but the AI didn't return to me for some reason, and then furthermore, if the LLM is there in play, and if the LLM has then made connections between data sources, or really made a synthesis over various data sources, have those connections been made appropriately? And especially for the supervisory context. At the moment, at least, the commercial foundation models are not always very good at understanding supervision, even though they understand, they can make connections and detect the same context in different documents very well, but supervision remains a niche area, and they are not the off-the-shelf models might not be good enough always for that, and we need to be very careful. And then lastly, are these models summarizing the information fairly? Is it really picking up the key points out of the information that we would like to be extracted? And then the same thing in the analysis. We need to be able to think that, are there possibly alternative reasoning paths or predictions to those produced by the AI? Ideally, then my team provides the supervisors the means for doing this testing? And also, very importantly, are my results very sensitive to small changes in parameters or the model? And with the case of LLMs, just running the same prompt again, am I getting the same recommendation or something completely different? So this robustness is really important in creating that trust that we are relying on the right pieces of insight. And then the same in the reporting, that again, is the output covering fairly all the different parts of the analysis, and then ultimately the accountability. Am I happy to stand behind these results? Is still my name under the paper? Am I happy that this goes out as mine? If there was a co-pilot in play, if there was a summer intern in play, whether there was a junior analyst in play, that I can't blame any of them.
Very interesting, Perto. Mindful of the time, we will see in a couple of seconds the results of the poll too. But Till, I can't help but asking you something about generative AI too. So we discuss AI governance, but there's also generative AI governance, and it's being increasingly explored in supervision too. So very briefly, are there any practical steps that the supervisors need to take to ensure that these technologies are also deployed ethically and effectively?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Very good question. Now, I think that applies for both. If the supervisor wants to use the tools themselves, as well as if they supervise someone else using those large models. And the main sort of takeaway is to have a closer look on what we might call the AI value chain. I think transparency across the value chain would be really vital in both using but also in supervising those models. Just imagine a situation, I mean, coming back to the right of an explanation, if the customer says, hey, I'm not sure about the outcome of your algorithm, can you explain me? Now, let's say the bank who's using credit scoring just buys that AI system off the shelf of a provider. Now, that provider might use some large model they have not trained, right? So they kind of buy it also out of the shelf. They turn to the large model provider, but they maybe have purchased the data from somewhere or use someone for data annotation, and again, someone else who's running this on a cloud, right? So you can easily see how many different actors are involved in the development and deployment of just one single AI system. And so I think that role is going to be increasingly important. And if we now compare this to some other industries, so for instance, in automotive, you have the situation that the OEMs are the big ones, and the further you go down the value chain, the more actors you have and the smaller is their contribution. Now with AI, it seems to be entirely the opposite, right? Because the further you go back, the fewer actors you have and the more powerful they are, looking into the large providers for big models and also cloud infrastructure, for instance, right? So you have specific dynamics here. Now, what can you ask as a supervisor is firstly, well, who's in charge of what? Right, so it depends on the classification of the AI system. Suppose it's a high-risk AI system. Now, who's in charge of cybersecurity, of data governance, of those kind of things? Because maybe that's not even in the control of the provider. So they need to find arrangements, be it in contracts or otherwise, to make sure that actually those requirements are adhered to at the end of the day. And now when it comes then to the provider of that large model, for instance, here we have on the one side the code of practice that is currently being crafted through a multi-stakeholder process by the AI office, but that's also a voluntary kind of way of implementing this. So it's up to the choice of the large model provider. If they don't choose it, they need to demonstrate otherwise how they fulfill their own requirements. So there's some points where the supervisor can come in, but again, as I said, I think it's the transparency along the value chain that will be really central in terms of having a holistic view here across the accountability that is indeed in the hands of many here when it comes to Gen AI.
Great. And imagine also a supervisor using generative AI tools, because we've seen an increase also in generative AI tools used by supervisors. They will also have to take all of these into consideration themselves. Thank you, Till, very much. We're already a couple of minutes over, but if we see also the poll results, we see that the majority thinks that overcoming concerns around ethics, privacy, and algorithmic decision-making is the greatest challenge, followed by encouraging innovation while preventing misuse, ensuring high quality, unbiased, secure data for the AI systems, translating broad ethical guidelines into actionable policies. To close, 10 seconds for each one of you to close our session. In your opinion, which one do you think is the greatest challenge when we talk about AI governance and ethics?
Maybe I can start with
Yeah.
one that is not necessarily captured here. The objective of balancing both mitigation of risks, but also allowing all the beneficial impact of this transformative technology to materialize. And we need to keep this balance as authorities as well.
Thank you, Iota. Berto?
Yes, well, I of course could repeat myself. I say, as a head of innovation department, of course, first and foremost, I want us to be able to innovate, keep on innovating. But then it is very important that, like I said, that we are not ending up with worse decisions than we had before. So it is very important that we are at least as good as we were before. And for that, we do need to have governance in place and ensure that to ensure that the human is in the loop, or rather we heard these models like sheep constantly ensuring that they go to the right direction.
Great. And Till?
Yes, I think we should move fast and fix things, not moving too fast, right? I mean, we see a very very fast-paced technological progress, but I think, as mentioned before, we shouldn't innovate at any cost. We see humans are important at every stage, be it in development or deployment, or at least as the affected ones, and that needs to be taken into account. It's a huge learning journey, I would say, and so that needs to be acknowledged when moving fast, not too fast.
Great. And that's Drew, over to you. Thank you all very much for joining today. I hope you find the discussion interesting, and let's continue the discussion offline too. Thank you all.
Great. Adding my thanks, and Calliope, great job moderating. All of those online, please join us in continuing this AI conversation in our next session, which is going to cover practical AI readiness for financial authorities. So see you all there. Thank you.